Support comes from Mosby Building Arts. Sometimes the smaller home projects make the biggest difference. Mosby creates custom spaces that help you love your home even more. For projects big and small, visit callmosby.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Missourians sent some pretty clear messages during Tuesday's primary. They really like their state parks and really want Jackson County to elect their assessor. But they absolutely do not want to make it harder to pass some constitutional amendments or embark on a plan to phase out the state's income tax. St. Louis area Democrats also rendered decisive verdicts in contested races for Congress and St. Louis County Executive. Congressman Wesley Bell easily prevailed in a closely watched rematch with former Congresswoman Cori Bush, while St. Louis County Assessor Jake Zimmerman outflanked two state senators in the Democratic race for county executive.
If you are interested in giving us a St. Louis County government that once again the people of this community can be proud of, then I look forward to welcoming you into the rest of this fight. Onward to November, and not just to November, but to January and beyond, because this was the easy part. The hard part is doing the work.
So what does Tuesday mean for Missouri's November election? And is it possible that another decision from yesterday could provoke do-over congressional primaries? Joining us to break down the primary results is Rachel Lippmann, St. Louis Public Radio's Justice Correspondent. Rachel, welcome.
Always fun.
And joining us from beautiful and scenic mid-Missouri is Sarah Kellogg, St. Louis Public Radio State House and Politics reporter. Sarah, welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Glad to be here, Jason.
And if we all seem a little tired or a little over-energetic, is because we have been up all night covering this election. We might have partaked in a little too much coffee this morning and afternoon. So let's start close to home with the race for Missouri's 1st Congressional District. Congressman Wesley Bell outflanked former Congresswoman Cori Bush, winning the Democratic primary by well over 20 percentage points. Here's Bell making his victory speech on Tuesday night.
I'm going to bring this back to St. Louis. When we think about the person who has to take the bus to get there, to get to work, to get to that second job, when we think about the people who have to make these types of decisions about whether they can afford their prescriptions, whether they have to cut back on a meal, we do have a lot of work to do. And the only way we do that is if we come together.
That was Congressman Wesley Bell, a Democrat from St. Louis County, speaking at his watch party on Tuesday night. Rachel, this was a closely watched race, but it was not close.
No.
Were you surprised?
By the margin, yes. I think I was not surprised necessarily that Bell won. I think the dynamics that were present in some of the other upsets of establishment candidates in places like New York, Colorado aren't necessarily present here in the state of Missouri or in the 1st Congressional District. But the fact that this was the first race called of the night based on absentee ballots was quite the surprise to me.
And what happened was, I think Bell got 70% of the absentee vote in St. Louis County and also won the absentee vote in the city.
By a wide margin. I think that's when the race called was when the city put out its first ballots.
Sarah, this outcome reminded me of what happened in 2022 when Bush was running against State Senator Steve Roberts. Bush had a lot of active and loud opposition, but she managed to win very decisively. Is that basically what happened here in 2026? Albeit by a smaller margin, but Bell still won by a very comfortable margin.
I would argue, yeah, it's pretty similar. I do think it's different in the fact that it's Bush trying to regain her old seat. You know, she was someone who was a congresswoman for a while, so that kind of made it, you had a record to kind of go against, to look at, and as well as what Bell had been running on. And I do think that Roberts was maybe a weaker candidate than Bell, which is why Bell was able to beat Bush. But I do think it's similar enough, I think, to say that we got a repeat of 2022.
Money is, of course, also a factor here, too. Bell had a lot more support from outside groups for reasons that matter but don't matter in the context of the race, specifically positioning on Israel, the war in Iran, those kind of areas. I think that also helped a lot, too.
Well, I need to just bring something else up. I watch a lot of Hulu. Lauren Todd, my wife, and I like watching It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And we saw a negative ad against Cori Bush every time there was a commercial. I saw zero ads for Cori Bush. And several people told me that the campaign just didn't have any money to respond. So the message that I saw is that you can beat a candidate that is backed by pro-Israel groups that are connected to AIPAC, but you have to have a response over broadcast television. It cannot just be on social media. What do you think about that?
And it can't just be on the doors either, and the message has to get out there even from mailers. You know, even if you don't have enough money to go up on broadcast TV, you've got to get the message out of how you are going to help address, as Congressman Bell said, the mother that needs to get on the bus to go to her second job. I think there was room for her to say, here is how I'm going to address the very real problems. And, you know, here is my plan that I'm going to try to advance forward in Congress, and I will fight for it. But the only mailer that I remember seeing from Cori Bush in my, at my door, and we live in a similar area, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, was just her touting a lot of endorsements that I'm not sure really registered or mattered to some of the key voting blocks.
I would not say that Bush was magnanimous in defeat. During her watch party in St. Louis County, Bush called on her supporters to hold Bell accountable since he is favored to win over Republican Paul Berry III in November.
What we need is servant leadership, and we don't have that right now. But you know what? So we are going to have to do it ourselves. We can't look to somebody else to do this for us. Let me tell you, the time is now. And if we don't hold, as he goes back in for another 2 years, if we don't hold him publicly accountable, if we go back into our areas and we're quiet, then that's a failure of ours.
That was former Congresswoman Cori Bush speaking at her watch party near Jennings. So a lot of candidates who lost were magnanimous in defeat. Frankly, I don't blame Cori Bush for not being so. I mean, the ads were often deeply personal against her and her husband, as she mentioned in her speech. I think that these two candidates do not like each other. We were the only news outlet that got them in a room to talk to each other. And I can tell you, as the person in the middle, it was icy. So I'm not going to be her tone police. She's allowed to feel the way she felt, but she lost, and she lost badly. Yeah. So what's your thought, Rachel?
I mean, I think she is trying to figure out what stood out to me kind of from the results last night is every time that Cori Bush won, she won the city. And even when she lost to Wesley Bell in 2024, she won the city. She did not win the city last night. So that tells me there's a disconnect with the message that she was putting out there with key voter blocks. Now, we can't rule out the idea that the GOP may have pulled ballots in Mo 1 Democratic and said Wesley Bell is our candidate. We want to push him over the edge. We can't rule out that possibility. But would that have been enough to have her win or lose? Was that the tipping point to lose the city? I think she's just trying to figure out, she's looking probably nationwide, going similar candidates have won. This could be our year, and trying to figure out what is different about Mo 1 than some of the others.
Sarah, the big cloud hanging over this race is that Republicans in Jefferson City are openly talking about splitting up St. Louis and St. Louis County in a similar manner to how Kansas City was diced up into 3 districts in 2025. Do you think anything about Tuesday's results will give Republicans pause about doing that?
I mean, I think there might have been reason for pause before Tuesday's election results. I think that is a very big risk that they have to see whether or not they want to take. They also don't know how it's going to turn out in Kansas City, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but that's also not a guaranteed win for Republicans either. So I think there's a lot of factors that they need to talk about and see what happens before they make a decision to split up Mo1.
And what Sarah is alluding to is that in the 5th district, if the new map is in place, State Senator Rick Bratton is going up against Congressman Emanuel Cleaver of Kansas City. That district is much, much more Republican than it was in 2022. But Sarah, if it is a blue wave election, I do not think Cleaver automatically loses that race, especially because Bratton, while I think deserves kudos for winning that primary, which was very contentious, he might just be too conservative for that district. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that Bratton he's the former chair of the Freedom Caucus before he had to step down last year due to the stadium vote. But he is definitely one of the most right-wing voices they could have picked for that seat. And with a lot of people probably mad in the first place that the 5th got split up, there might be, and again, a blue wave. I think Cleaver has a real chance to still win despite having a less of an advantage now.
We need to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll stay on the topic of redistricting and talk about the impact of Secretary of State Denny Hoskins rejecting a referendum on a plan aimed at ousting Democratic Congressman Emanuel Cleaver from office. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at JEMASTL.com.
Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Before polls closed on Tuesday, Secretary of State Denny Hoskins made a very consequential announcement. The GOP official rejected a referendum aimed at overturning a 2025 redistricting plan aimed at ousting Democratic Congressman Emanuel Cleaver of Kansas City. The group that put the referendum forward, People Not Politicians, immediately filed a lawsuit, which is expected to come to a conclusion by early September. And the result of the legal action could have massive implications for the 2026 election cycle. Shortly after his Tuesday afternoon press conference, I spoke with Secretary of State Hoskins. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for joining us today. Why is the redistricting referendum unconstitutional?
For multiple different reasons. Well, number one, I ruled it insufficient due to it being unconstitutional. First of all, the Missouri Constitution does not authorize a referendum on congressional redistricting passed by the Missouri General Assembly. Federal law is also clear. The Missouri Constitution cannot be interpreted to strip the General Assembly of its authority over redistricting absent a clear statement. We have Article 3, Section 45 of the Missouri Constitution that states the General Assembly shall, by law, divide the state into congressional districts. And then lastly, Article 3, Section 45 makes no mention of redistricting by IP or referendum. So that's first. And then secondly, the deadlines for certification just don't make sense, Jason. I mean, today's the primary election day, and it's also the deadline for certification as sufficient or insufficient for the referendum. So the deadlines don't make sense. It doesn't make sense to have the deadline for the referendum also be the same day as the primary election day. And then lastly, the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 4 says the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. So for those reasons, and as well as they're further outlined in General Hanaway's opinion that accompanied the insufficient ruling of insufficiency, I declare the referendum insufficient.
If you read the Missouri Constitution, there are several things that cannot be placed up for a referendum very specifically. One of them, I believe, is appropriations bills, and the other are bills with emergency clauses, which means they go into effect right away. It does not say anything about a redistricting referendum being excluded. Does that weaken your argument?
I don't think that weakens the argument. I think that our founders never thought that a congressional redistricting map would be up for a referendum. And, the Attorney General Hanaway has agreed with that. My internal counsel has agreed with that. Governor Kehoe has agreed with that. And so I would say that, hey, the Missouri First map is still the law of the land.
There are two specific pieces of precedent that the people, not politician folks point to. One is the fact that Missouri did have a referendum on redistricting in 1922. The other is a U.S. Supreme Court case that very explicitly says that you can have a referendum on a redistricting plan. Can you respond to both of those points?
I would say that the first in the 1922 case, that's been over 100 years ago. And there's been different interpretations of the Missouri Constitution as well as state law since 1922. And my understanding is no one challenged the referendum in 1922 as being unconstitutional. So I would say that on the prior 1922 case. The other one I'm not as familiar with as far as the federal legislation. I know we did appear before a federal court this past December of 2025. In December 2025, basically the federal court said that the state court would have to decide that. So I think that I am in compliance with Missouri state law as well as the Missouri Constitution.
You and other Republicans just argued successfully, I may add, before the Missouri Supreme Court that the lack of explicit authorization for mid-decade redistricting did not equate to a prohibition on mid-decade redistricting. It's what I have famously called the Airbud rule. So now it seems that people, not politicians, get to use the Airbud rule against you. Are you ready to basically say the Airbud rule doesn't apply here?
Most certainly. I think the U.S. Constitution makes it very clear that the General Assembly is the one that draws districts for the representatives as well as U.S. senators. And so, again, I think that our founders never intended and never even thought this would become a thing as far as doing a referendum on a congressional redistricting map.
Why did you make this decision now instead of months ago? For context, when Secretary of State Ashcroft got the signatures for right to work back in 2017, he made a decision right away. When you say basically that why do you have until the day of the primary election for this, people are going to be like, you could have made this decision months ago, like your predecessor did on a very similar proposal.
I could have, but I've met all state law requirements and deadlines. I've met all constitutional deadlines. As a certified public accountant, I say that I want to make sure all my I's are dotted and T's are crossed. We have a system of checks and balances for a reason. And so I wanted to make sure that everything was in order. I wanted to make sure that our local election authorities were able to utilize their time up until July 27th of 2026 in order to verify the signatures, and that I was able to utilize my time to make sure everything was correct by today's deadline at 5 p.m.
A number of county clerks on both sides of the aisle have told me they were not happy that you were waiting to make this decision for the following reason. If you're wrong and the Missouri Supreme Court puts the referendum on the ballot based off the Maggard decision, that means the map was never in effect as of last December, and it broaches the possibility that there could be redo primaries for these congressional elections. Are you confident that if you're wrong here and the Missouri Supreme Court overrules you, that we are not going to have redo primaries?
Yes, I guess the courts can do whatever they want if there's a court decision that probably will ultimately be decided by the Missouri Supreme Court. However, I'm confident in the research I've done. I'm confident in my internal general counsel, and I'm confident in the Attorney General's opinion that says that, hey, the Missouri First map is the law of the land.
Are you also confident that if you're wrong and they put the referendum on the ballot, that the 2025 map would still be in effect for the general?
I know one of the things that the courts would look at is how far down the road that we are. I mean, the candidates have all ran in their own districts, the new Missouri First map districts. They've met folks in those districts, and all the local election authorities as well as the county clerks have instituted the new map. So I would say that we are very far down the road as far as the new Missouri First map. And I would hope that the courts would not overturn that and do something different.
As much as I would like to predict the future on that, I will let the courts decide. Before I let you go, there are going to be people who say you made this decision because you support a map that draws out Emanuel Cleaver, and you don't want Respect Missouri voters to pass because if it passes, it locks in all sorts of initiative petitions that Republicans don't like. So I'm giving you a chance to preemptively respond to that criticism.
As a Missouri State representative, as a Missouri State senator, I advocated for the Missouri First map and a 7-1 map. So this is not something new. It's not something that I just decided as Secretary of State, hey, I think I support a 7-1 map. This is something that I voted for and advocated for in 2022 was a 7-1 map. So this has nothing to do, obviously, with my position as Secretary of State. My position as Secretary of State is not to make laws, but to administer the law. And so I know that there are some folks out there that are frustrated and don't want me to follow the Missouri state law and the Missouri Constitution. And I've told them, like, hey, you need to talk to your state rep and your state senator. Those are the people that actually can make laws and file bills. I will simply administer Missouri state law and the Constitution as it's written.
That was Missouri Secretary of State Denny Hoskins speaking with me about his decision to reject a referendum aimed at overturning a 2025 redistricting plan. I should note, when I mentioned Respect Missouri voters, that was referencing how Hoskins also rejected a proposal that is aimed at making it more difficult for the legislature to overturn voter-approved initiatives. Sarah, what did you make of the Secretary's comments there?
I mean, there's a lot there. I think the thing that stood out to me was near the end where he says the courts might be considering how far along the process is, whether or not to suspend the map. But as you've reported, the court ruled in May that if the redistricting referendum qualifies for the ballot, the map will have been suspended. So I don't think they're going to look at that. I think they're going to say, okay, it has the signatures that you qualified for it. That means it's suspended. So I don't think they're going to care where they are in the process. And then I do think it's very convenient for Secretary Hoskins that the positions that he's administering the law for are positions that he's advocating for, such as the 7-1 map. So I think that, ultimately he can say that he is, going through and protecting the Constitution, but ultimately these are positions that he has advocated for.
As I mentioned, people, not politicians, have already filed a lawsuit against Hoskins, and they do believe the Missouri Supreme Court will overturn his decision. Here's Chuck Hatfield, an attorney with People Not Politicians.
I've been doing this now, feels like for almost 30 years, and I don't recall a certificate of insufficiency that refused to say how many signatures an initiative or a referendum has and then declared the law. The courts have been very clear that the Secretary and the Attorney General's role is administrative and ministerial. They're not judges. They're not the people, and they don't get to say, that's what our lawsuit's about, and we feel confident the courts will agree with us.
That was Chuck Hatfield, an attorney with People Not Politicians, discussing Hoskins' decision to reject the redistricting referendum. Rachel, we cannot predict what the Supreme Court is going to do. That is not our role here as journalists. But going on Sarah's point, I vividly remember back in 2012, there was a redo election between Susan Carlson and Stacey Newman based on the fact that voters voted in a primary, which they were not supposed to do. And the remedy for that was redo elections.
That is correct.
That seems to be eerily similar to what could have happened if the redistricting referendum is put on the ballot.
The one difference I think there is there was very clearly a new primary could change the result. There was one vote difference between Susan Carlson and Stacey Newman in the first vote. And the fact that they didn't know how many individuals had voted in the wrong precinct. This was a situation where two different precincts got split into two districts and people weren't being careful enough at the polling places to hand out the right ballot. That was an instance where it was pretty clear there was enough of an election regularity to potentially change the outcome of the race. You could make a case here that there's no way to know whether the results would change if the old map is in effect, except for the new map. But I do think this could be considered enough of an election irregularity that they've got to do something to address it.
And some congressional candidates were already bracing for the possibility of redo elections before Tuesday's primary. That includes Fred Wellman, a Democrat who narrowly won his race to take on Congresswoman Ann Wagner in the fall. Wellman and I discussed the impact of a redo scenario in late July.
I believe in my heart that Denny, Hoskins, and the Republicans' goal is to create this chaos. And we say that's the 3 C's a lot right now. It's cost, it's corruption, and it's chaos. And here in Missouri, the chaos is Denny Hoskins smirking at us as he says, well, the law says I get to August 4th. The goal is for people like me who are challengers to burn through our money, burn through our efforts, try to run old. Right now, I'm essentially running in 2 districts, right? I'm not just running in the new map. I'm running in the old map.
Yeah.
Now, I've done the math. The district is still mostly St. Louis and Franklin County.
Yep.
So I have to win those. So while they think they're playing games with me, it's not enough games to save Ann this time. But it is scaring them. I mean, I've had those conversations with national people. Well, what's that redistricting going to do to you? I don't want to invest if it's out of reach. And then I have to convince them it's not.
That was Fred Wellman, who won the Democratic nomination in Missouri's 2nd congressional district on Tuesday.
That was not a large victory either. This is one of those situations where it is possible, depending on which Missouri 2 map is in effect for the Democrat, that outcome may, and I want to emphasize may, change.
It could, which is why I brought up that example. So thank you for pointing that out. So let's move on to the other big statewide news, and that's the failure of Amendment 4 and Amendment 5. Amendment 4 would have made it harder to amend the state constitution, and Amendment 5 would have expanded sales and use taxes as a way to get rid of the income tax. Sarah, let's start with Amendment 5, and I'm going to just be brutal here. I think objectively, this may be the biggest electoral catastrophe I've ever seen in Missouri politics. I've never seen so much money spent to pass something get so few votes. What went wrong here?
I think there are so many possible answers to that. I think part of it, and I've talked about this in my reporting, is that lawmakers or supporters of this were going up to constituents and saying, you know, do you want to pass this plan that's not really a plan, that gives lawmakers carte blanche to do whatever they want as far as expanding sales and use taxes in pursuit of lowering the income tax? There were some guardrails there, but pretty much we don't have a specific plan, but do you want to trust us and just let us do this for 5 years? And I think, you know, you're talking about the party of small government asking for a big blank check. And I think that turned a lot of people off. I think what also turned a lot of people off was, you know, again, questions they had of, well, what would the sales tax rate be? What would be taxed? What would be exempt? None of those questions could be answered because it wasn't there. And I think that even if there had been some form of a plan that people could have grasped their minds around, I think maybe there would have been some more votes, but there wasn't. And I think that was a huge mistake.
I asked last week if there would be any political fallout from Amendment 5, and there was. The handler of the bill in the Senate, Senator Curtis Trent, lost his primary on Tuesday to Lori Rook in Southwest Missouri. Greg Sharp, who opposed Amendment 5, won his primary to represent the 18th senatorial district in Northeast Missouri. One of the other things I noticed, too, Bryant Wolfen, who is a Republican from St. Genevieve County and was being primaried from, I guess, the establishment, and he also did not like Amendment 5. He won 65-35. So, Sarah, what do you make of these results?
I think that there definitely was an association with 5 with the people who handled them. I know we talked about Patterson, former Speaker John Patterson, who's running for Senate. He still won his primary, but, you know, we'll see what happens in November. But I do think there was an association with people who either handled 5 or were in favor. And I think that at least for Curtis Trent, you know, that was, I don't think he knew that was going to cost him his election, but it did. And I do think that is a direct result of that.
Rachel, moving on to Amendment 4. I think that shows what's popular in the Jefferson City bubble and among Republicans that's making constitutional amendments more difficult to pass. It might be popular in Jefferson City. It is not popular with people. People like the initiative petition process. And You could say maybe if it was 60%, maybe if it was 57%, it wouldn't have lost by 80-20. It still would have lost. It would have probably just lost 60-40.
Well, ironically, Jason, the rules that they created with Amendment 4, which is all 8 congressional districts, this failed in all 8 congressional districts. So it shows kind of how unpopular this was.
It failed in every single county in the state of Missouri. Every single county in the state of Missouri.
Yeah. What do you make of its demise, Rachel?
I would be curious to see if they don't try an Amendment 4 style change again when Amendment 5 is not on the ballot. It probably would still have lost, but I think there was such a concerted campaign to link 4 and 5 together because they were essentially saying, we want to take away the voice of the people in raising the use and sales tax, and then we want to make it impossible for you to do anything about it with Amendment 4. I think it's an effective campaign. And so it became automatically no on 4, no on 5. Those signs were ubiquitous everywhere in most of the state, or most of, the St. Louis area. I could see them trying again when it's just Amendment 4 and when there is maybe something less popular that the initiative petition process has pushed on the ballot.
That's why that Respect Missouri Voters plan is so critical, because it actually bars the legislature from putting changes to the initiative petition process up for a vote. That's why the legal fight over that is going to be very important. Now, Sarah, you spoke with Democratic House Minority Leader Ashley Aune about the results here, and she says that Democrats absolutely plan to hang Amendment 5 and Amendment 4 over the heads of Republicans. Here's what she had to say about that.
It is clear to me that the ballot measures that Missouri Republicans put on the ballot for voters to vote on were so very unpopular that they were just resoundingly rejected by the electorate across the state. What that tells me is that Missouri Republicans continue to be out of touch with Missourians. They continue to fail to deliver on what Missourians are actually asking for, which is a lower cost of living, property tax relief, access to health care, access to child care. These are the things that we should be solving in the legislature, not trying to take away the, access to the ballot for voters, and certainly not raising sales taxes on everything.
That was Ashley Aune, the Democratic House Minority Leader. Sarah, we saw in 2018 the resounding failure of right to work in August, and then Missourians voted for Josh Hawley and kept the legislature basically the same in terms of Republican supermajorities. Can Democrats sustain this momentum here?
I think they can to a degree. I think for some of, the main statewide races, share is the auditor race. I will say I do expect Fitzpatrick to probably win re-election there. But I think when it comes to House races, I think when it comes to state Senate races, I do think tying not only these two issues, but the vote back in 2005 that stripped the paid sick leave amendment, the statute that voters passed. I think that angered a lot of people, and I think it was sustained through these proposed amendments 4 and 5. And I do think in a wave Democratic year, which we might be seeing this year in November, I do think that there can be momentum to flip some House seats and maybe even flip some state Senate seats, as well as, we'll see what happens with Amendment 3, which will also drive out a lot of people, which, again, for listeners, would re-ban most abortions in the state.
The other ballot item news of note is that Amendment 1 easily passed. That was a proposal that renewed the state's sales tax for parks, historic sites, and water and soil conservation. Rachel and Sarah, everybody in Missouri seems to like parks. I would love to find the person that dislikes parks.
I don't think it's so much disliking parks as it is disliking taxes.
Yeah.
And I do think that there could have been maybe... It shows that voters clearly knew what was on each part of the ballot, because 1 and 2 passed very clearly and 4 and 5 didn't. So I think that there was a lot of intention going in there. And I do think, it was pretty hard to find someone who doesn't like state parks.
We need to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll talk to St. Louis County Assessor Jake Zimmerman about his big win in the Democratic primary for County Executive. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.
Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. For the first time since the mid-1970s, there was not an incumbent county executive on the ballot, and Democrats ended up choosing St. Louis County Assessor Jake Zimmerman to be their standard bearer in the fall. Zimmerman's win over state senators Brian Williams and Angela Walton Mosley is a remarkable political turnabout. He lost Democratic primaries for Attorney General and County Executive and appeared on paper to enter the 2026 race as the underdog against Williams. But the combination of clever television ads and an eclectic coalition pushed Zimmerman over the finish line. Zimmerman joins us live to talk about his victory. Jake, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thanks so much, Jason. Happy to be here.
I mentioned in the intro that you've had some setbacks in your political career. Why do you think this was the year you turned things around and won this very important Democratic primary?
You know, Jason, you've known me for a long time, and anyone who has seen my time in public service knows that I am exactly who I am, which is a little bit of a nerd, right? And I like to think that maybe this was just the moment where that's exactly what the voters were interested in. And when folks see the drama and the nonsense and the craziness out of Washington, D.C. and Jefferson City, as well as here at home, what I'd like to believe is that our message of getting rid of the drama and just doing the work might have paid some dividends.
I think you achieved a rare feat in St. Louis area politics. You won the support of some key organized labor groups, but also progressive political organizations and political figures. Those two groups do not often endorse the same candidate. How do you think that played a role of having what I classified as an eclectic coalition? How do you think that played a role in your win?
I think maybe they just all really like redheaded Jewish guys. But the other possible explanation would be that this was never about ideology. If you look at the squabbling that we've seen between the county council and the county executive and all the infighting and all the silliness, right, it's never had a Democratic versus Republican air about it, and it's never had a progressive versus conservative versus moderate air about it. And I think that the message of let's get rid of the drama and let's just do the job, I think that appeals to a whole bunch of people, and maybe even people who wouldn't otherwise be ideologically aligned with me. And I think it goes hand in hand with the thing that I always like to say, which is that there's not a Democratic or a Republican way to fill a pothole.
How do you plan to approach scenarios where the council pushes back against you without turning it into World War III, so to speak? Because I am old enough to remember that Steve Stenger and Sam Page entered office with 6-1 or 7-0 council majorities and then left where they had no support.
I think it's always possible to disagree without being disagreeable. I learned that during my time in Jefferson City. It's no secret that I have strongly held opinions, and I don't shy away from sharing those when the circumstances require it. But there's no rule that says when you disagree with someone, you've got to be a jerk. And I think rule number one right now for me is to lead by example, to listen before speaking, and to try really hard not to be a jerk.
You mentioned in your victory speech that the hard work begins after the election, and voters ended up rejecting a use tax that could have potentially made the county's financial situation a whole lot better. How do you think that's going to affect your ability to steer the county in a better financial direction if you end up winning over Republican Dennis Hancock in the fall?
Obviously, it makes it harder. There's no secret sauce here. County government is the same as a household budget. The amount of money coming in the door has to match the amount of money going out the door. And the voters spoke pretty clearly last night. And yeah, that means tough choices will have to be made, and that's going to require a whole lot of respectful collaboration with all of those council members, because we've got to make the decisions that the voters send us there to do.
Jake Zimmerman is St. Louis County's assessor and the winner of the Democratic primary for county executive. Jake, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it.
And over in St. Charles County, incumbent County Executive Steve Ehlmann prevailed over former State Senator Bill Eigel and former Lake St. Louis Mayor Jason Law. Ehlmann had initially planned on retiring from his post, but got back into the race, which turned out to be the right move. I spoke with Ehlmann earlier this morning.
Well, I hope it has something to do with the things we've been able to accomplish here in St. Charles County the last 19 years. And I think the other big issue here, I don't know that the candidates running against me and myself, I'm not sure that there was that much difference between us when it came to the issues, but there was quite a bit of difference when it came to our style of governing and our style when it comes to working with other people.
You had told me in particular that former Senator Eigel proposed a lot of things the county executive shouldn't do or can't do. Do you think that people in St. Charles County appreciated this realist approach about the powers of the county executive's office?
I certainly hope they did. And yeah, it's actually the county executive has quite a bit of power, especially compared to the mayor of St. Louis. But, you're county executive, you're not dictator. And that's the important thing here. As county executive, I can't get anything done without at least 4 of the 7 people on the county council wanting to go along with me. And you can't be the kind of person that, can't get along with even the people in your own party and then actually get something done as a county executive with a county council, with a highway commission in Jefferson City that decides what kind of roads you're going to get, with the mayors who we work together with to decide on road board projects, and right on up to East-West Gateway, where you not only have to deal with basically Republicans from your own county, but you have to deal with Republicans and Democrats from throughout the region, and make some very important decisions that are really important to a county like ours that is growing.
There will likely be 2 new county leaders joining you next year if you win the general election, Jake Zimmerman in St. Louis County and Tim Whitney in Jefferson County. They both have to win their general elections as well. But how As do you. But how do you feel about partnering with them to deal with regional issues like crime and population decline throughout the region?
Well, I think I've said this before. I've never been as optimistic as I am right now of our opportunity to work together and get some things done. Doesn't mean that we will, but the people that have been elected recently that will remain. I'm going to be meeting with the Jefferson County nominee, get to know him. Dave Schatz won in Franklin County, and Dave was the pro tem of the Senate, so he's very experienced and has a lot of information and ability that he can bring to the table. And I don't know Jake Zimmerman very well. I've met him a couple times. We've got some common friends. I'm going to hopefully get to know him, but what I do know of him, I think he's the kind of person that we can work together and really get some things done. I mean, St. Charles County, we're growing and we're continuing to grow, but we need to get the region growing as well. If we don't get the region growing, eventually everybody who wants to move to St. Charles will do it, and then the whole region will be no growth. So we need to get the region moving. And I think the place where a lot of that can happen is at East-West Gateway. And then if we can take some things to Jefferson City, we got a governor now who's from the St. Louis region who understands the needs down here. And we need to take advantage of that.
Steve Ehlmann has been St. Charles County Executive for roughly 20 years and won a contested GOP primary for the post on Tuesday. Mr. County Executive, thank you for joining us today.
Anytime, Jason.
And we're back with some concluding thoughts from St. Louis Public Radio's Rachel Lippmann and Sarah Kellogg. Rachel, why do you think Zimmerman ended up winning?
I think he had the support in areas central and south and west St. Louis County. You can't rule out that Angela Moseley did pull some votes away from Brian Williams in North St. Louis County. But if you look at the precinct results, he didn't really have support in other areas of St. Louis County. Even if yes, the margin for Moseley was more than the margin between the top two candidates, Williams and Zimmerman, but you can't automatically assume that all of those votes would have gone to Williams. I think he just had, for whatever reason, maybe because he is not introducing himself for the first time to a lot of the county as Williams was, he just had more widespread support and quite possibly also was not affected by a spoiler candidate.
Sarah, Governor Mike Kehoe did not have a good night last night in that he was a very strong supporter of Amendments 4 and 5. But I do think that he might have been a little happy that Eigel did not win and will not be able to use the St. Charles County Executive's post as a springboard to primary Kehoe in 2028. Doesn't mean he won't or can't, but what do you make of the longer-term political impact of Ehlmann winning over Eigel?
I do think it maybe slows momentum for former Senator Eigel that he didn't win county executive. I'm not going to lie. I was a little surprised at that result. I did expect him to win. So I do think it maybe slows down maybe what he's wanting to accomplish, which I do think, down the line, he's not said anything, but higher office. I don't think it's going to stop him from running, a position ever again. So I think we won't have to wait too long, I think, to see Senator Eigel attempt a position, but I do think this is a setback for sure.
I thought it was 50-50 whether he announced his campaign for governor from the podium or on the same night as he lost for St. Charles County Executive, but...
Yeah. Well, going back to St. Louis County for a moment, Rachel, one of the quirks about county elections in this very Democratic county is that Republicans do much better in county executive races, namely Mark Mantovani in 2022, Rick Stream in 2014. You had a chance to talk to Dennis Hancock about his challenge against Jake Zimmerman. How is he feeling about what will be an uphill battle, but is not as insurmountable as people may think?
I think what you have to remember in 2014 with Rick Stream and the closeness of that vote was that, or 2018 as well, with Rick Stream was other factors there. But what he is saying is he is looking at the results from last night and seeing that there is a potential split in the Democratic Party that he may try to see if he can exploit and pull individuals away from the Democratic Party. I don't know how well that's going to work in what is probably going to be a Democratic wave year, but he's looking at the numbers and saying, hey, maybe I can get a wedge in there and do some outreach in areas that are maybe potentially not typical strongholds for Republican voters.
Sarah, before I let you go, I'd be remiss not to talk about two state Senate results that include the St. Louis region. Rachel Prouty, a state representative from Ferguson, won a contested primary to succeed. Soon-to-be former Senator Brian Williams. And Gina Mitten will be Rachel and I's state senator after she not only won the county, but won the city with over 60% of the vote. Beyond your reactions, what do you think Prouty and Mitten will bring to the Democratic caucus in the Senate?
I think both of them. I know, so I'll start with Rachel Prouty. I think a lot of the time she is very, adherent and has very strong convictions. And I think that sometimes means that she doesn't always go with what other Democrats would do. I've seen her vote yes on bills that other Democrats have voted no for, and she's definitely her own person. And I think that is more, it kind of suits the Senate a little better. So I'm really interested to see. She's obviously very passionate about the welfare and health and happiness of children. And so I expect to see a lot of that be a big point for her going forward, because she's very likely to win in November. And then with now soon-to-be State Senator Mitten, since no Republican has filed, I do think her, when we chatted with her, I think her main focus is going to be a lot of defense, because she was pretty blunt in that, being in a super minority doesn't mean you get a lot of priorities. And I think she's going to prioritize the budget and making sure that dollars for healthcare and education stay intact. So I think she's going to bring a lot of defense going in, as what she has said that would be a big priority of hers.
St. Louis Public Radio's Rachel Lippmann and Sarah Kellogg both covered this wild and wacky election cycle with me. Thank you both for joining us today.
You're welcome, Jason.
Of course.
This episode was produced by Jason Rosenbaum.
Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr. This podcast was mixed and edited by Aaron.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.